good afternoon, as well as good morning to our viewers, wherever you may be. We hope all of you are doing well in spite of the pandemic situation we are in. My name is June Colmenares, Commander of the Knights of Rizal, Aloha Chapter, and I will be your MC for today's event. As chapter commander and on behalf of the officers and members of the Knights of Rizal Aloha Chapter, I would like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to our 10th lecture in our Rizalian lecture series. I especially welcome my fellow Knights of Rizal as well as our friends from the Philippines. A major goal of the Knights of Rizal is to educate people on the life, works, and ideas of our national hero, Dr. Jose P. Rizal. And this lecture series is one way by which our chapter endeavors to help achieve this. Before we proceed, I would like to remind our participants that the lecture will be for 30 to 45 minutes and will be immediately followed by a 5 to 10 minute reaction from a reactor. There will be a Q&A session after the reaction. For the Q&A portion, we suggest that you write down your questions, identifying yourself in our chat space. We will read the written questions first before we entertain live questions. I would like to remind everybody to mute your microphones when you are not speaking. I now call on Sir Tim Liena, KOR, to introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Sir June. Aloha, everyone. Okay, let me introduce Dr. Leongson. Dr. Raymond Yanis Leongson, PhD, KGCR, is a retired professor at the University of Hawaii, Leeward Community College. Described by his peers as a social justice activist, he served as a member of the Hawaii Civil Rights Commission and president of the Filipino Coalition for Solidarity, a civil rights organization in Hawaii. A lifetime member of the Knights of Rizal, he served as a chapter commander of the Knights of Rizal Hawaii chapter and was responsible for the initiation of several Rizalian programs and projects, including the Hawaii Rizalian Youth Leadership Institute, Hawaii Rizalian Conference, and Project Pepe. With Sir Dr. Serafin Colmenares Jr., KGCR, they initiated and pushed for the renaming of Rizal Square in downtown Honolulu, the annual Dr. Jose P. Rizal Award for Peace and Social Justice, the Center for Rizalian Studies, among others. He is currently the area commander of the Knights of Rizal in the state of Hawaii and the president of the KOR Aloha chapter. He is a recipient of numerous awards, including Excellence in Education from the Filipino Community Center and Outstanding Educator from the United Filipino Councils in Hawaii, UFCH, and the Oahu Filipino Community Council, OFCC. The Knights of Rizal Supreme Council recognized his contributions by awarding him the Distinguished Gold Service Cross and elevating him to the highest rank of the Order Knight Grand Cross of Rizal, KGCR. A past president of the UP Alumni Association of Hawaii, he was given the UPAA Distinguished Service Award for an alumnus in 2011 by the University of the Philippines, where he obtained his PhD degree in education. Let us all welcome Dr. Raymond Yanis Leongson.
Thank you very much, Sir Tim. Maraming salamat. And to all our participants, I see 28 right now and more are pouring in. Thank you so much for joining us. Magandang umaga sa Pilipinas. Good evening here in Hawaii and almost like good night now on the mainland. We are going to focus on this presentation on the two novels of Dr. Jose Rizal, The Noli and Fili as resistance literature and the relentless quest for a just and humane society. And allow me to share my screen. Uh, let's see here. Okay. Do you get to see the screen right now, Pulwan?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So for before I move on with the presentation, I would like to share you a brief outline of the lecture of the lecture here. For the introduction, I'll look into um, fiction as a vehicle of truth and reality, and then I will try to invite you to see Noli and Philly as resistance literature, looking at how resistance, and then we'll look into how resistance research views the concept of resistance. I'll review a few definitions of resistance and recognize resistance as a dismantling and constructive force. And then we'll look into clarifying the concept of a just and humane society and entertain some basic or some legal basis of the same, particularly in reference to the fundamental law of the land, the Philippine Constitution. And then we'll touch a bit on the intersection of the concepts of resistance, justice, and humanity, and proceed to identifying some injustices and inhumanities exposed in the Noli and Fili, as well as the forms of resistance in Rizal's novels. A very important task, I believe, is looking at how relevant Rizal's novels are into our 21st century lives. So I'll attempt to translate the Noli and Fili into our contemporary times, and finally proceed to some concluding thoughts, highlighting some lessons learned from the Noli and echoing Rizal's call to action. Kind of quite a list here. Most of us may have been moved by at least one fictional story, product of a creative and expressive mind, but which so closely resembles reality. Such a story may have driven us mad or offered us hope, opened our minds, or spurred us to action. Fiction as it is, such a story may depict a reality or realities that our senses cannot deny. Fictional as it may be, it speaks truth to power and truth to us. As the American author of stories and novels, Jessamine West, puts it, fiction reveals truth that reality obscures. Such is the case of the two great novels of Dr. Jose Rizal, the Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo, herein also referred to as Noli and Fili respectively, which have become a vehicle of truth not only during the lithographic printing era over a century ago, but to the ubiquitous digital internet and often unrestrainable social media of our time. Rizal employed legends and parables, metaphors and parodies, mockery and sarcasm, as well as historical and ethnological accounts in his novels. This makes the Noli and Fili timeless, and that helps us rebuild our belief in reality, faith in the truth, and disdain for the corrupt. Jacob Abbott, an American minister, author of children's books, and professor of mathematics and philosophy at Amherst College, who lived about a generation before Rizal, so that was 1800, 1803 to 1879, clearly shared the same thinking with the great Filipino novelist, thinker, and reformist. He argued that fictional stories are not only an effective vehicle for communicating the truths of morality, but that they do so far more effectively than true accounts of moral acts. A good fiction's job is to comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable, quoted author, novelist, and story writer David Foster Wallace in an interview. Rizal's writings, particularly the Noli and Fili, conveyed images of reality and sounded off voices of resistance. In a mix of comedy and tragedy, mockery and contempt, homage and irreverence, Rizal's novels expose the social cancer and the reign of greed that we're consuming and that continue to consume the moral fiber of Filipinos and incited them to break loose from a colonial bondage that has shackled them for 3 centuries. The novels were vibrant and powerful forces that resisted subjugation and oppression and demanded freedom of the will and the right to self-determination through progressive and liberating education. Now let's look at Noli and Fili as a resistance literature. I take resistance literature as a body of literary works that reflects reality and actively resists oppression or oppressive systems in a creative manner. It includes, but is not limited to, fiction, cinema, drama, poetry, visual art, and song, reflecting the many forms of political resistance throughout history. It is a stunning response against oppression, using written words to elicit sympathy for certain issues and educate the whole world about them. Barbara Harlow, a scholar and author who brought issues of human rights and post-colonialism into the classroom, suggests that the theory of resistance literature is in its politics. In her seminal study, Resistance Literature, published in 1987, she posits that imaginative writing is a way to gain control over the historical and cultural record. This rot is seen from all sides as no less crucial than the armed struggle. One of the great powers of resistance literature it is its ability to tell a different story than one propagated by the powers invested in history being remembered or disremembered a certain way. Resistance literature houses works that celebrate the profound meanings, provocative insights, unconstrained energy, and powerful human emotions in what has slowly come to be recognized as resistance art. As a writer and colonial subject, Rizal understood that the most effective demonstration of resistance under the colonial system was through historical fiction. While many readers describe his novels as romantic and ethnological novels, which they are in fact political novels in disguise that not only exposed and confronted abuse of power, but ventured into ways of resolving powerlessness. They are fearless, blistering attack on clerical, meaning the friars, the priests, then Spanish priests, then cruelty and corruption, as well as a brilliant and recent prescription for freedom and empowerment. Apolinario Mabini, widely referred to as the brain and conscience of the Philippine Revolution, recognized the influence of Rizal's novels in the resistance movement against oppressive colonial power. He saw that writing itself is an act of resistance. He wrote in La Revolucion, it was necessary to picture the miseries of the Filipinos more movingly so that the abuses and affliction that they cause might be publicly revealed in the most vivid colors of reality. Only a novel could combine all these attractions, and Rizal set himself to writing novels. Mabini admitted, however, that very few Spaniards read Rizal's novels because they'd been written by a subversive Indio. and that not many Filipinos read them either because their publication and reading in the islands were prohibited. In writing his novels, Rizal was cognizant of the truth and veracity of his accounts. And this is where the unassailable power of resistance literature lies. In a draft letter written in French, addressed to only to my dear friend, explaining the nature and character of his novel Noli Me Tangere, Rizal wrote, "The incidents I relate are all true, and they have happened. I can give proofs of them. My book may have, and it has, defects from the artistic or aesthetic point of view. I don't deny it. But what cannot be questioned is the impartiality of my narration. Apart from a creative mind and an unusual gift of weaving words into a powerful literary weapon, an authentic dynamo of resistance literature must have the moral courage to portray reality, even if this would invite vicious attacks from detractors." Following the publication of Noli Me Tangere, a Spanish Augustinian priest, Father Jose Rodriguez, condemned Rizal's books and Rizal himself as heretical, blasphemous, and impious. Father Salvador Font, another Augustinian priest, demanded that the importation, reproduction, and circulation of this pernicious book should be absolutely prohibited. Marcelo H. del Pilar, editor of La Solidaridad, noted, "In the Philippines, the censors wish the Noli Me Tangere, touch me not, to be Noli Me Legere, meaning read me not." The same fate struck El Filibusterismo, the sequel of Noli Me Tangere, which is a vacillating call to revolution directed against the entire Spanish colonial and bureaucratic apparatus. Both novels were declared subversive by Spanish authorities, the transport and possession criminalized.
Remind you that you
But
are
other works,
Christian, you are a follower of Christ.
somebody is zumbaming me, I think. Like other works of resistance, they were met with opposing resistance, often stronger or violent resistance from the wielders of power who are determined in preserving the status quo. But the banning of the Noli and Fili only mirrored the silencing of subjects by their tormentors. Freedom of assembly, press freedom, and freedom of speech and expression were likewise curtailed. Even the freedom to follow personal moral compass was denied. It was seen as irreverent, antisocial, and destructive. Everyone was expected to dutifully march to the beat of the drum, and there's only one liberating response to it: resistance. Let's look at resistance as a dismantling and constructive force. I was initiated into the world of civil resistance in my early college life in denunciation of imperialism, feudalism, and bureaucratic capitalism. The youthful experience was a lesson not only of socio-economic, political, and cultural dynamics, but also about the virtues of courage, perseverance, resourcefulness, and sacrifice. It was a realization that resistance to power and perceived systemic issues can be costly not only in terms of monetary currency, but especially human resource. Political activists and detainees, journalists and academics, critics and revolutionaries during the martial law regime in the Philippines can attest to this. Our reactor for this lecture, who will be speaking later, Sir Luis Barbo, can also confirm this. The term resistance has been ambiguous. To start, there is no such thing as the definition of and categorization of resistance. Resistance studies show multiple and wide-ranging definitions of this act, depending on the focus and intent. Let's look at some definitions offered here. Barbara Bush, in her book Imperialism, Race, and Resistance, defines resistance as any action, individual or collective, violent or lawful, covert and overt, that is critical of, opposes, upsets, or challenges the smooth running of colonial rule. Paul Routledge, in his article, Speciality of Resistance, that appears in Geographies of Resistance, defines resistance as any action that attempts to challenge, change, or retain particular circumstances relating to societal relations, processes, and or institutions, which imply some form of contestation and cannot be separated from practice of domination. To Michael Baas and others, resistance is a particular kind of act, not an intent or effect, that prevails as a response to power from below, which has the possibility to negotiate and undermine power. From these definitions, two common features of resistance can be identified. One, that resistance is an act. And two, that resistance is always oppositional to power. Resistance has referred to both nonviolent and violent, individual and collective, unorganized and organized political actions aimed at reforming or perhaps radically overhauling the existing society, and those seeking to preserve or re-establish the status quo. Historically, resistance has, to a large extent, been associated with negative force, destructiveness, reactionary or revolutionary ideologies, or unusual and sudden explosion of violence. In reality, resistance holds the potential to constructively transform societies and change history. The constructive power of resistance cannot be underestimated, just as it has the capacity to subvert a corrupt, authoritarian, and abusive regime. It has a creative power to conceive and give birth to a morally upright social system. Much of the gains of social justice and human and civil rights were not freely and readily granted. They were won through tireless activism and obstinate civil resistance. They are the fruit of struggles fueled by incalculable blood, sweat, and tears. To resist dysfunction is to restore efficiency. To resist lies is to insist on reality and the truth. To resist injustice and cruelty is to reclaim justice and humanity. The act of resistance becomes a liberating and humanizing feat. Let us look at what a just and human society may mean. The quest for a just and human society is perhaps the most sacred of all human endeavors. It demands time and energy, courage and perseverance. It exacts sacrifice, the offering of which may include material comfort, honor, even dear life. And Rizal recognized this in his June 22nd, 1889 letter to Marcelo H. del Pilar. He wrote, We fight so that there may be more justice and more liberty, and for the sacred rights of man. Whoever wants to take part in this crusade ought to have renounced beforehand life and fortune. A just and humane social space is an inspiration of every reasonable society, whether or not it is articulated in its governing rules. One country that explicitly expresses its fundamental law, the goal of attaining this ideal, is the Philippines. The preamble of the Philippines in 1987 Philippine Constitution states, "We, the sovereign Filipino people, in order to build a just and humane society." The 1987 preamble unequivocally sets forth the goal of building a just and humane society. A clause not found in the preamble of the past Philippine constitutions, like the 1899 Malolos Constitution, the 1935 Commonwealth Constitution, the 1943 World War II period Constitution, or the 1973 Constitution drafted and adopted under martial law. And here, the preamble of the 1987 Philippine Constitution explicitly states the ideals and aspirations of the people to promote the common good and the values of independence and democracy under the rule of law in a society nurtured by justice, freedom, love, equality, and peace. This aspiration of a just and humane society are reiterated and more specifically stated in the Constitution's Declaration of Principles and State Policies. The Constitution mandates that the prime duty of the government is to serve and protect the people, and that the state shall promote just and dynamic social order, social justice in all phases of national development, and value the dignity of every human person and guarantee full respect of human rights. These principles and policies coincide with the aspirations of Dr. Jose Rizal, as reflected in his novels and in other writings and correspondences with his compatriots. In El Filibusterismo, Rizal, speaking as Isagani, a keen, intrepid student leader, declares, "Governments were set up for the welfare of the people. And to comply properly with their end, they must follow the manifestations of the citizens who know their needs." This is the essence of the principle of public office is a public trust. A government officer is entrusted with public power by the people, and that the officer holds this power in trust to be used only for the people's benefit and never for the benefit of himself or of a few. A violation of this social contract constitutes corruption, not only of the office, but the character of the official, making him unfit to hold public office. Freedom from ignorance and poverty, the provision of mechanisms to achieve an empowered citizenry, improvement in the standard of living and quality of life. These are the ingredients of a just and dynamic order. They make up what Rizal terms the high principles of morality, the eternal principles of immutable justice. Rizal recognized these basic needs with a recurring theme on education in both Noli and Fili. In the former, Crisostomo Ibarra is committed to erecting a school. In the latter, the Association of Students, composed of Isagani, Macaraig, Placido Penitente, and other, you may call, saling pusa, like the vacillating Juanito Pelaez, the truant Tadeo, and the pessimistic Pexon. And they've been persistent in putting up an academy of Spanish instruction to be administered by native Filipinos. In the real world, outside these fictional novels, Rizal encouraged the women of Malolos to pursue their dreams of putting up a school for women. While an exile in the Pitan, Rizal himself conducted free formal instruction for boys, complete with a curriculum and schedule. Rizal saw education not only as a source of enlightenment, but a ladder for economic mobility. The promotion of social justice and respect for human rights and dignity are likewise central in both novels. The lives of Sisa and her sons, that of Bruno and Tarsilo, Elias, and eventually Maria Clara in the Noli Me Tangere are replete with accounts of exploitation, cruelty, persecution, and abuse. In El Filibusterismo, the plight of Cabezang Tales and his daughter Huli, who becomes pambayad ng utang, the manhandling of the poor pochero who forgot his cedula, and as a result detained by the Guardia Civil, hit with rifle butts, and taken to the barracks to face the commandant. This reflects the excesses of the social system, lorded by power-drunk rogues and ruffians. Let's now look into resistance, justice, and humanity. Writing to expose a corrupt and oppressive system is an act of resistance. It is a courageous act that refuses to accept an arrangement that violates basic human civility and instead aims to dismantling a rooting social process and structure. But apart from its dismantling capacity, writing as an act of resistance can be constructive. It can open up minds blinded and paralyzed by indifference, bigotry, or outright lies and move them to understand and seek ways to rectify misdeed. This was what Rizal committed to do when he wrote his novels. Dedicating the Noli to my fatherland, he wrote, "I will do with thee what the ancients did with their sick, exposing them on the steps of the temple, so that everyone who came to invoke the divinity might offer them a remedy." These resistance literatures, the Noli and the Fili, became a voice of conscience that inspired the members of the Katipunan to launch the Philippine Revolution, that is the destructive offshoot, that culminated in the proclamation of Philippine independence, the constructive outcome. Resistance, properly wielded and directed, offers an opportunity to reclaim justice and humanity. It is often said, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. The power of resistance is well documented along struggles of indigenous communities and poor people's movements in the global south, primarily the regions of Asia, Latin America, Africa, and Oceania. They fight to survive against colonization, marginalization, exploitation, and physical and cultural genocide, and stay alive by regenerating, recreating, and developing resilience through autonomous social structures. They create parallel societies of political, economic, cultural, or spiritual organizations, which also serve as the basis of their ability to resist repression, marginalization, and displacement. Let's look into the injustices and inhumanities in the Noli and Fili. Rizal portrayed in both Noli and Fili the condition of Filipinos under the Spanish colonial rule with wit, equity, and yes, irreverence. He stormed not only the colonial powers, but their local agents and enablers. He peeled through layers upon layers of injustices and inhumanities against the natives, layers of oppression and indignities concealed by distorted sense of humility and godliness. He wrote, "We need to be assailed to be awakened. This will reveal us our weaknesses and will improve us." So what are the injustices and inhumanities portrayed by Rizal in Anoli and Philly? We cannot fully cover the transgression in this presentation, but these are what readily floats on my mind. Perversion and abuse of power. Rizal vigorously attacked the abusive powers of the friars that controlled the affairs of the state and the minds and hearts of the people. This was the absolute power of friarocracy, the authoritarian government of the friars, by the friars, and for the friars. The government has no vision of any bright future. It is a mere arm, and the head is the convent, Rizal says. The Spanish colonial power lorded the natives, robbing their lands, subjecting them to forced labor, arresting and detaining those who disobeyed their orders, and even executing those who resisted their powers. We all know what happened to Dr. Rizal. In the Noli, Padre Damaso, remember him, those of you who have read the Noli, exhorts complete submission of the Indio to the friar. That is, by uncovering himself, bending one knee, and kissing the hand of the religious. Pay attention to what the holy councils proclaim, he says. When an Indio meets a priest on the street, he must bend his head and offer his neck to the master, to Linan. If the priest and the Indio are both on horseback, then the Indio should stop, reverently remove his salakot, his head covering, and finally, when the Indio is on horseback and the priest on foot, the Indio should get down his horse and not mount it until the priest tells him, "Begun," or is already far away. That description I got from the Noli. The secret siring of Maria Clara by Padre Damaso and the lustful desiring of Padre Salvi on Crisostomo Ibarra's fiancée Maria Clara in the Noli, and the carnal advance of Padre Camora and Huli in the Philly portray the perverted, morally corrupt character of predators in religious habit. The civil government, personified by the Gobernadorcillo, the Alferez, or the chief of police, you might call that now, and the Guardia Civil, and the wealthy bourgeois, are portrayed as the influential ruling and middle-class sectors that enjoyed entitlements not afforded to everyone, and who often abuse their powers and influence. Racial and economic discrimination. The steamship taboo in chapter 1 of El Filibusterismo provides a metaphor of the socio-economic structure and dynamics of the Philippines. Rizal describes the array of passengers as follows. From below deck loom brown faces and black heads. All types of Indios, Chinese, and half-breeds jammed among merchandise and trunks. While up on deck, in the upper deck, under a tarpaulin that protects them from the sun, are seated on comfortable armchairs a few passengers dressed like Europeans, friars and office workers, smoking cigar and contemplating the countryside, seemingly without perceiving the skipper's and the sailor's effort to negotiate the difficulties of the river. Spanish friars and peninsulares looked down at native Filipinos with disdain and derisively called them Indios. But the more repellent derision comes from natives who have washed the brownness off their hands and think of themselves to be better than other natives. Rizal presented them in the person of Doña Victorina. Rizal describes Doña Victorina, always high strung, hurls invectives against ships, bancas, coconut rafts, boats, Indians who travel, and even against laundresses and bathers who upset her with their merriment and din. Yes, the taboo would go very well if there were no Indians in the river, Indians in the country. Yes, and if there were not a single Indio in the world, not noticing that the helmsmen were Indians, the crewmen were Indians, the engineers were Indians, 99% of the passengers Indians, and she herself Indio. If her makeup were scraped off and her showy gown shed. Discrimination based on external properties seems to be a norm. We mortals are like tortoises, Rizal wrote. We are valued and classified according to our shells. Oppression of the poor and marginalized. Caesar symbolized the oppressed and marginalized poor who was driven to madness after losing her son Christine, abused by her husband, cruelly maltreated by the wife of the alferez, Doña Consolacion, and tormented by townsfolk. Caesar personifies the poor who are robbed of their dignity and driven to absurdity and hopelessness. In the Philly, Thales, the son of woodcutter Tandancelo, cleared some forest which they believed belonged to no one. During the clearing of the land, his family fell sick and his wife and daughter succumbed to illness and they died. After transforming the clearing into a productive farm, a religious order claimed ownership of the land, and for them to be able to stay, Thales would need to pay rental, an imposed obligation that exorbitantly went up each year. He tried to seek justice through the courts, spending his savings to pay lawyers and notaries, but to no avail. A poor Indio, unlettered and friendless, fighting against a powerful religious order, is denied justice. This account depicts the countless land-grabbing cases committed by the friars and their bureaucrat partners in the Philippines. Condemnation to ignorance and powerlessness. Ignorance Rizal unforgivingly criticized the uncritical, rote memory educational system during the Spanish era and pushed for emancipated, secular, and progressive education for the youth. He protested against a system that tyrannized freedom of thought and freedom of speech. Through Isagani, the student leader in the Philly, Rizal declared, "Here, all independent thoughts, all words which are not an echo of the will of the powerful are judged as subversion. A people which is tyrannized is obliged to be hypocritical. Those to whom the truth is denied give you falsehood. He who makes himself a tyrant or tyrant begets slaves." Aside from each one's responsibility to seek his own perfection, there is the innate desire in man to cultivate his intelligence, a desire that grows more powerful the more it is repressed. Objectification and devaluation of women. In the Philly, Julie, the daughter of Cabezang becomes pambayad utang or payment for a debt. by becoming the kasambahay, or that's what we call the housemaid, of the religiously bigoted Sister Penchang. Julie personifies a lovely and loving but monetized daughter who was desired by a Dominican friar, Padre Camora. Choosing honor over disgrace, she jumps out the window of the convent, eventually ending her life. The plight of Maria Clara is even more puzzling. Refusing to be married to a man she does not love, she chooses to enter the convent and become a nun. The last chapter of the Noli Me Tangere epilogue only offers us a clue of her plight. One night in September, a hurricane hit Manila. Under the flashing lightning, two sentries taking shelter near the convent saw what appeared to them as a ghost of a nun, quote, as beautiful as the Virgin. Her arms face stretched toward heaven, as if imploring. As the thunder was heard, a woeful mourning. The author Rizal wonders, who is it who moans in the middle of the night, despite the wind, the rain, and the tempest? Has the Lord abandoned his temple in the convent? Does he no longer listen to prayers? The following day, a representative of the official authorities asked to speak with the abbess, the head of the convent, and demanded to meet all the nuns. It is said that one of them appeared with her habit soaking wet and torn to shreds. Weeping, she asked for protection against the violence of hypocrisy. Deprivation of human dignity and violation of human rights. Two accounts from the Noli readily come to mind. The story of Crispin, the son of Sisa, and Tarsilo, the brother of Tulisan Bruno. Crispin, a young 7-year-old bell ringer, was falsely accused of stealing money from the church, was dragged down the stairs in a belfry while harshly being beaten by the sacristan mayor. The details of this brutal death are conjured in his brother's dream. The miserable Crispin is kicked, thrown on the floor, whipped while helplessly resisting and screaming. He is finally struck with a cane on the head and falls on the floor. This time, he no longer resists or screams. He is now a lifeless mass. Perhaps the most brutal description of human cruelty in the Noli is the torture of Tarsilo Alasigan. Tarsilo is presumably an Indio captured by the Guardia Civil for his alleged involvement in the attack on a Spanish military barracks in the desire to avenge his father, who had died at the hands of the civil guards. Tarsilo is given fist blows, kicks, lashes, and eventually lowered in a filthy well. Hung by his feet, Tarsilo's head would be lowered first, often grazing against the protruding stones and filthy plants which grew among the fissures, and kept some time underwater. His grueling descent would be repeated over and over, his head submerged in the water lasting longer than the one before. But he remains stubborn and is lowered again, this time lasting for a minute and a half. Rizal writes, when Tarsilo reappears, his features were no longer contorted. The half-open eyelids revealed the white eyeballs. From his mouth oozed vile water with streaks of blood. The wind was blowing cold, but his body no longer shivered, unquote. The gruesome portrayals of cruelty in Rizal's novel paint in our minds the viciousness and savagery of human rights violation, something we often hear about but may not have had the unfortunate occasion to witness much less experience. Let's move into the forms of resistance in Rizal's novels. Speaking as Simon Ibarra, trying to convince reluctant Basilio to join him in his planned rebellion against the friars and the bureaucrat enablers, Rizal writes, resignation is not always a virtue. It is a crime, but it encourages tyrannies. There are no despots, for there are no slaves. This statement from Rizal is a call to resist and oppose the unjust and tyrannical social system. In both Noli and Fili, he hinted various forms of resistance that people resorted to in order to arrest social ills and establish a preferred society. In identifying forms of resistance in Rizal's novels and drawing from resistance literatures previously reviewed, I have devised a simple matrix that may be helpful in categorizing and understanding the dynamics of such counteraction. Resistance may be demonstrated individually, sometimes spontaneously or in an organized fashion, or employed collectively, oftentimes in a planned and organized manner. Resistance studies also documented nonviolent resistance as well as violent resistance. But just as there is no such thing as that definition of resistance, we admit that there is no singular way of categorizing them. But for purposes of this presentation, we will content ourselves with this basic matrix. Let's take the individual nonviolent resistance. Disobedience. Disobedience may seem to be an untoward behavior, but it can be a statement of resistance. In the Noli, Don Rafael, the father of Crisostomo Ibarra, who did not see the light even on the first page of the novel, chose to follow his moral compass rather than submit himself to the directives of the friars, rejecting the idea of confessing transgressions to a priest. For this, he was considered a subversive and a heretic. Maria Clara, on the contrary to common portrayals of her as a meek and submissive daughter, took a firm stand and disobeyed her parents when she was asked to wed Linares, a man she did not love. Nunnery or death, she firmly poses. And she successfully resists the whims of her parents. You notice that I said parents or fathers. Isagani, the firm student leader in the Fili, refuses to blindly submit to authorities, even to his respected professor, Padre Fernandez. Why, he asks, if your social organization is defective, why not change it or at least listen to the voice of those who come out prejudiced? Resisting the advice of his mentors for him to simply focus on their own welfare and interest, Isagani stubbornly disobeys them and continues to fight for the students' cause, which is to establish an academy of instruction. Progressive education. An emancipated progressive education has been a consistent cry in Rizal's novels. Rizal believed that learning should be free from physical or corporal punishments, and the teachers should be given some freedom to develop and teach the curriculum they deem relevant to the needs of the students, and not simply prescribed by officials who, in reality, like to keep them locked up in ignorance. He also signaled the need for a secular education free from the forced religious doctrine. Through the schoolmaster in the Noli, Rizal said, the school needs first and foremost to have a place of its own, not as it is now, where I teach beside the parish priest's carriage under the convent house. Now note that the parish priest's carriage under the convent house is not a physical location. It is a metaphor for the overruling interference of the church in its doctrines in a free, unrestricted learning. Progressive education emphasizes teaching students how to think rather than relying on rote memorization, discovery and experience rather than passive one-way instruction. In the chapter A Class in Physics in the Philly, Rizal ridicules the enigmatic, quote-unquote, enigmatic apparatuses placed inside the cabinets, set up to be shown to the guests and other officials who came from the peninsula, that's Spain, so that upon seeing it, they could shake their head with satisfaction. Individual nonviolent resistance can be organized in collective level. Let's look at student organizing and mobilization. The role of the youth, in particular the students, is highlighted in the Philly. The youth organized and mobilized themselves as association of students to fight for the establishment of an emancipated academy of instruction. Collectively, they pushed for progressive education, one that is founded on the praxis of discovery, experience, and critical thinking, free from the interference of religious order, and intellectual resistance and protest that symbolizes the consolidation of a national consciousness. Rizal recognized the importance of grassroots organizing and mobilization. Speaking through Elias and the Noli, he said, "By ourselves alone, it is true, we are nothing. But embrace the cause of the people. Make common cause with the people. Do not ignore their voices. Give an example to others. Launch the idea of what is called the motherland." On page 336 of his Noli. In their mobilization, the university students involved not only their peers, but other sectors of society. Lawyers like Senor Pasta, government officials like Don Custodio, priests and professors like Padre Fernandez. Even the bailarina mistress of Don Custodio Pepay. The students held meetings, lobbied government officials and religious leaders, even launched sarcastic and grotesque protests and other forms of civil resistance. Civil resistance is a way for ordinary people to fight for their rights, freedom, and justice without using violence. Around the world, it has been called by different names: civil disobedience, nonviolent struggle, direct action, people power, political defiance, and civic mobilization. But regardless of which term is used, the fundamental dynamics of civil resistance remain essentially the same. When people choose to end their cooperation with unjust rulers, that system becomes far more prohibitive to operate. When enough people choose to disobey, the system can become unsustainable, and then it has to change or collapse. Retribution, which is here, let me just say that often a collective yet loosely organized entity like the less than modest steamship Tabu persists and asserts itself to float and glide, arduously sailing upstream the Pasig River, carrying numerous passengers. The steamship Tabu is a metaphor of the Philippines and its people. The nonviolent insistence, thus the nonviolent insistence to exist, is not only a feature of resistance, it becomes a form of resistance itself. When nonviolent options for change fall into deaf ears and simply tossed into the trash bin, disappointments and frustration, anger and violence mount. Paraphrasing Martin Luther King Jr., violence is the voice of the unheard. And so we get into retribution and revenge. The desire for retribution or revenge is a recourse for people who have been wronged and are denied justice. We see this form of resistance waged by Elias and Tarsilo in the Noli, and Thales and Simon in the Phili. When and where systematic bias is blatant and individuals lose faith in the justice system, individuals may end up putting the law into their hands and seek retribution and revenge. And this level of violence can escalate into a collective violence. We see now rebellion or revolution or armed struggle. The society only knows greed and inequity, where the struggling masses are simply muted and dismissed. When government becomes unresponsive to their cries, when justice system tosses the scale and favors only the moneyed and the influential, then the abandoned and the marginalized may be pushed to reclaim their dignity by employing force and violence. This was the case for Bruno and his brother Tarsilo in the Noli, and Thales and his father Tandangsello in the Phili. Oppressed and left out, they abandoned their villages, went up to the mountains, and joined what I might call the neglected people's army, or the 19th century NPA. Elias in Noli, Simon in Ibarra, and eventually Basilio, the son of Sisa, in Phili, with the raging desire to avenge the injustice committed against them and their families, likewise plotted to launch an armed revolution that would end the root of oppression. The government and religious orders branded them tulisanes, or bandits, and like Rizal, filibustero, or subversive, and declared them enemies of the state. Rizal, speaking as a high official who represents few Spaniards who fought for Filipino ideals alongside the reformists, wrote in the Phili, I read the right to rise up. When a people is denied light, home, liberty, justice, goods without which life is not possible, and at the same time constitute the patrimony of man, those people have the right to treat those who despoil them as robbers who attack them on the street. And all honest men who would not go on the side of the aggrieved make themselves accomplices and stain their conscience. For Miguel de Unamuno, a Spanish essayist, novelist, and philosopher, Rizal is the spirit of contradiction, a soul that dreads the revolution, although deep inside desires it. Rizal seems to vacillate on the idea of armed struggle. He asks, what will the world say at the sight of such butchery? The revolution conceived in both Noli and Phili fizzled out and failed. His novels sparked the flames of the revolution in the colony, but he also condemned the revolution declared by Andres Bonifacio and the Katipunan. But George Asenero, a scholar on world systems theory and a grandson of one of the students of Rizal in the Pitan, who happened also to be one of our speakers in this lecture forum, argues that Rizal was against a revolution, not the revolution. Rizal, he says, did not repudiate the revolution. Or how could he do it when this was yet to happen? Rizal, as Asenero claims, understood the world had entered a new epoch, and as the last days of the century began, an era that was going to provide a playing field for what he calls game of the game of the great powers. Translating the Noli, let's translate the Noli and the Fili into our contemporary times. How do we translate the Noli and Fili into our contemporary time? How relevant is Rizal and his ideas to the present? What parallelisms do we have from the circumstances of then and now, that we continue to face similar issues make the Noli and Fili relevant to these days? The quest for a just and humane society remains to be a fundamental human aspiration. In the pursuit of this objective, reason and compassion are indispensable guiding posts. Freedom, justice, and recognition of human rights and dignity were common themes in Rizal's writings. Such freedom is not only limited to political liberties, it includes social, economic, and cultural freedoms, many of which intersect with basic human rights. A just society requires that people are treated equally before the law. Double standards and discrimination are inimical to the principle of fairness and justice and create an undue social process. Are the laws enforced equally among citizens, between the haves and the poor, the socially entrenched and the marginalized, men and women, the white and the colored people? How well has our socio-political system balanced the scale of justice? In the Noli, Rizal strongly warns, a country that obeys because it is deceived, a government which commands because it resorts to deception, a government which does not know to inspire love and respect for its own sake. Begging your pardon, sir, I believe that such government is stupid and suicidal when it rejoices in that belief. Do we find deception and corruption in our government, disregard of and disrespect for our rights as citizens? Have truth and reason been the foundation of governance and public service? Do we find our government officials as honest instruments to staunchly serve and protect the people? Or have they become a mockery of public service presiding over a reign of greed? In the Fili, Rizal decried this abuse. In its impotence, the government put on a show of force against the persons who appeared suspect, so that by force of cruelty, the people would not notice its frailty, the fear that guarded such measure. How much blood and how many lives would wake us up from the stupor of indifference and complacency? When do we see a Crispin, an Elias, a Tarsilo, and a Thales, Tandang Selo, whose blood have to be unnecessarily spilled by the forces of power? Why do the spirits of Elias and Cabezang Thales continue to reincarnate among the struggling people, giving up their peaceful lives and trekking the trails of a grim and uncertain revolt? Are their descendants still denied the justice they have been fighting for? Cruising on the ocean of wealth and power, how are the friars of today, the proclaimed envoys of the divine who live kingly lives, while many of their devotees wallow in indulgence, in indigence? How are they taking care of the essential needs of their people in this earthly life, rather than scaring them of eternal damnation or simply assuring them of an obscure paradisiacal joy in the afterlife? Why do they amass enormous wealth on earth while urging their devotees to live a modest life? Who is to shred the mantle of hypocrisy to reveal the skeleton of deception? In an effort to silence people and deny their voices. Tagging them has become a convenient resort. Don Rafael, the father of Crisostomo Ibarra, Tasio, the freethinker and philosopher, Elias and Tarsilo, Cabezang Tales, even Isagani, the youth leader activist, were tagged as enemies of the state. How free today are those who publicly speak against exploitation and oppression, those who denounce poverty and inequity, those who criticize government corruption and incompetence, those who complain against injustice and human rights violations. During the Spanish colonial era, Rizal's novels were banned and destroyed, critical press muted, writers and poets silenced. How free today are the media and the press, journalists and academics, without facing threats against freedom, life, and existence. In spite of threats, Rizal would most likely, in spite of threats, Rizal would most likely wield his pen and admonish bureaucratic and corporate filth, exposing and denouncing plunder and corruption, incompetence and betrayal of public trust, assault against citizens and invasion of the country's economic and territorial waters. Women have certainly made great advances, bringing honor to country and womankind. Yet, we still have Caesars abused at home, driven mad by cruelty of poverty and chauvinism, or coolies who are denied the right to fulfill their dreams, while they bail out others to enjoy their freedom or redemption, or even Maria Claras who are robbed of their dignity, grabbed and violated to satisfy carnal desires. And I would like to proceed to my concluding thoughts. We're over a century past Rizal's time, 130 years after the publication of El Filibusterismo and Noli Me Tangere. We may now be on a different stage in a different era. Characters and actors may have changed, but the plot of the old story stubbornly continues. Speaking as Elias in the Noli, Rizal said, "Let there be an end to cowardice, weakness, to sighing and sobbing, while there is still life and blood, when insult and challenge are joined by derision." Rizal pins his hope on the citizens, especially the youth, and not so much on those who have corrupted the system. Speaking as Padre Salvi in the Philly, he warned, "The glory of saving a country is not for him who has contributed to his ruin." Complacency is not an option. There is no time to wait, no time to waste. The quest for a just and humane society is a relentless work. If we cannot obtain a finished stature, says, polished in all details, from the rough block that we polish, those who are to come will take charge. Neither do silence and indifference have a place in the continuing struggle. Borrowing Dr. Martin Luther King's word, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." Wealth, prestige, and accolades will not be enough laurels to crown us in our final years. The response of the young student Isagani to Senor Pasta, an acclaimed lawyer, when the latter urged the former to simply focus on his own interest, so that he will have something to be proud of when he grows white hair like him, is apropos. Isagani says, when I have white hair like that, Senor, and my vision goes back to my past and see that I have worked only for myself without doing the good that I could or should for the country that has given me everything, for the citizens who have helped me live, then, Senor, each white hair would be a thorn, and instead of glorifying in them, I would feel shame. Thank you for your time. Maraming salamat. Diyos Tangina, daghang salamat sa inyong lahat.
Thank you and mahalo, Sir Raymond, for that very interesting, very informational, and thought-provoking lecture. I can tell how passionate you are about the topic. Before I introduce our reactor, I would like to remind the participants again that they can write questions they want to ask our lecturer in our chat room, and we will read them after the reaction. Thank you. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce our reactor to today's lecture. Sir Lutgardo Barbo, or in short, Sir Lutz, is an educator, a politician, a lawyer, and human rights activist. He obtained his bachelor's degree in education from the Philippine Normal College, now the Philippine Normal University, and his law degree from the University of Santo Tomas. A past president of his alma mater, Philippine Normal University, as well as Taguig City University, Sir Lutz is also a member of the faculty of the Ateneo de Manila University School of Government. He was a human rights activist during the pre-martial law days and was appointed acting governor by then President Corazon Aquino in 1986, and then later elected governor of the province of Eastern Samar. He was chief of staff of former Senator Aquilino or Nene Pimentel and of his son, Senator Coco Pimentel, and also served as secretary of the Philippine Senate for 2 congressional terms. Recently, he was elected vice chair of the PDP Laban party and has cast his lot as a senatorial candidate in the upcoming 2022 Philippine elections. Sir Lutz is currently the Deputy Supreme Commander of the Knights of Rizal. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sir Lutz Barbo.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sir John Colmenares. May I go direct to the point? May I add a little something about what Sir June said, that the presentation was very interesting. Sir Raymond was passionate. It was well comprehensive. I would also say that it was mesmerizing and spellbounding. I was mesmerized. I was spellbound, and I learned a lot. It's more than simply being informative and educational. Now, I hope you will forgive me, because I cannot forget associating myself with some of the abuses of the past government, this present government. And let me tell you that once upon a time, I had a book. I really wanted to read that book, The Art of Organizing Resistance. And I was with a group of young men, and it came to pass that I was taken into custody and detention by the so-called ASO, Arrest, Search, and Seizure Order. I cannot help saying that there is some kind of, well, very, very important relevance of what Sir Raymond was telling us about to the government that we have in the country. Now, uh, I listed some points, but the presentation was so comprehensive that I could not follow up with some of the points. Very, very good points. Now, there is no denying the fact that Noli and Pili are resistance literature. More than that, they are beautiful, remarkable resistance literature because it was written in uh, a very good language that Rizal was famous for. Now, uh, the political novels, of course, as we all know, are fictional, but they are based on historical accounts. That is true, and Rizal was saying, I can prove that every incident, every circumstance that I wrote in the books are backed up by actual incidents that happened.
Mhm.
I think that that is clear now. Before I would say that I would rather have we would rather have the question and answer portion. But let me say this: uh, Isagani was my favorite, one of my favorite characters in Filibusterismo. And when I was slapped with ASO, arrested at seizure order, I always remembered Isagani. And when I was inside, and it was doubly difficult because not only did not I did not only did not, I did not have I knew I there was no reason for the government then to detain me, but I was newly married and my wife was on the family way, so it was very difficult. But I always remembered Isagani, and uh, when I memorized that portion, Sir Raymond, when the lawyer, because Isagani was asking for help together with Makaraig and other student activists. And they were saying that, well, it's about time. Uh, we have a Castilian Academy. We should know how to speak correctly the Spanish language, the language of Cervantes. And so everybody was given assignment. And Isagani was assigned to Senor Pasta, Senor Pasta being a lawyer who quoted to the friars. But Senor Pasta was a friend of Padre Florentino. And so when Isagani went to the law office, uh, there were plenty of clients because Senor Pasta as a lawyer was famous. But Senor Pasta went outside of his office and said, Isagani, just a minute. I know what you came here for. I knew the stories about your desire, you activists. Why don't you concentrate being a medical student? Why don't you become a doctor and then practice and then get married? You choose a beautiful woman and wealthy woman, and then go to convenion every Sunday and all that. Uh, do not interfere with the affairs of government because you will be disappointed. And to cut the long story short, Isagani walked out on him. But before he did that, he said, uh, when I have gray hairs like yours, sir, and I turn my gaze back over my past and see that I have only worked for myself without having done what I plainly could and should have done for the country that has given me everything, for the citizens that have helped me to live. Then, sir, every gray hair will be a thorn, and instead of rejoicing, they will shame me. That was always, a point of remembrance whenever there were difficulties during our resistance time. He was always an inspiration. And by the way, after he walked out on Senior Pasta, he was arrested for being subversive. Within a few hours, 3 or 4 hours, he was arrested. And while I was under detention, I always remembered Isagani. No, but I was always reminded that I might be overdoing this because there were times I think I was losing my mind, and I was imagining I was Incredible Hulk or Superman because I knew I committed no crime. But and my wife would come every now and then. She was crying. I said, "No, don't cry. Perhaps this is part of fighting for our rights. You do not get your rights for free. You will have to work for it. You have to sacrifice for it. You have to defend it. Sometimes you even have to die for it because only those who are not afraid to die for freedom are fit to live in freedom." And that was what I was saying. But anyway, I have many more to say, but in the art of organizing resistance, we were prepared. I tell you, it's very difficult to be in jail if you know there's no reason for it, except na you are oppositional, to use the word of Sir Raymond. Very difficult. But sometimes, if you want to give meaning to your life, if you want to give substance to your existence, you have to stand up because it might be inconvenient and comfortable and even dangerous to your health and to you. But you have got to do that. If you are a good Filipino citizen, if you're civic-minded, you have got to fight, right? For example, in this dispensation, I always remember Rizal's time. That is why Rizal is very relevant, very, very relevant. And perhaps, may I add something more before we can entertain questions and answers? I would love the questions and answers portion. I was thinking of Robert Kennedy. Robert Kennedy was the brother of John Kennedy, as you know. And when he was assassinated, I think it was Edward Kennedy who made mention about what Robert Kennedy said. And I think this reflects on what Rizal's vision was. And he said, when Robert Kennedy said, each time a man stands up for an idea or acts to improve the lot of others or fights injustice, he sends forth a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring. Those ripples build the current that can sweep down the mightiest walls of repression and oppression. For us, my friends, ripples of hope were created by Jose Rizal for us, from which to work on and do something for our country. And I know that many of our heroes died because they were inspired by Rizal. And I remember Chrysostom Ibarra when he went into the house of Tasio, Philosophing Tasio, and he said, your books, you have plenty of books in your house, but these are topsy-turvy. Nagkalat itong mga libro mo kung saan-saan. I have many books, sabi ni Tasio was saying that. And what do you do with the books, according to Chrysostom Ibarra? Well, I am writing. I'm writing. And may I see you writing? According to Chrysostom Ibarra. And Tasio, sure it. And Chrysostom Ibarra smiled. But you are writing in hieroglyphics. We cannot understand this. These are hieroglyphics. And Tasio said, I am not writing for this generation. This generation is lost. I am writing for the future generations. But why do you have to do that? Well, as you said, no todos dormían en la noche de los abuelos. No todos dormían en la noche de los abuelos. Kumbaga sa atin, there were those who did not sleep in the dark nights of our forefathers. Meaning, some of us were fighting. And I think yun ang beauty ng relevance ni Rizal because he can really inspire us. I have to say more, but I would rather that we have our question and answer portion. Thank you, Sir John, and thank you, Sir Raymond.
Thank you, Sir Lutz.
Many thanks, Sir Lutz Barbo, KGOR, for your insightful and equally ardent comments. We now start the Q&A portion. Our lecturer can start it off by responding to the comments of the reactor. I will then read the written questions and serve as a moderator. Sir Raymond, do you have any comments? Oh, you're muted, Sir Raymond.
Yeah, first of all, I would like to thank everyone for joining us in our 10th virtual Rizalian lecture. We do this we've been doing this every month. Next month, we are going to have 2 sessions. Surgeon will talk a little bit more about that later on. But please fill in your questions if you have any questions that you may raise. Or you may also as well share, not only asking questions, but share your thoughts with us. And it's going to be more conversational rather than just me like responding to your questions because, you know, I know that many have a lot of things to probably share with the rest as well.
Okay. I don't see any question actually in our chat room. Mm-hmm. Is there anybody who wants to raise a question directly to our lecturer or make a comment? Anybody?
I'm always scared of silence. You know, there are 2 things. Either the audience understood everything, or just they didn't understand anything from. No, anyway, yeah, we welcome not only questions but even your thoughts. If there are like parallel ideas, even like ideas that may be contrary to what I have shared, that would be very welcome. We welcome all ideas here. So, Jun, any question?
Well, outside the Noli and the Fili, one of Rizal's works that actually deals with some of the ideas that you presented was his letter to the women of Malolos. Mm-hmm. Can you further expound on that?
Yeah, the letter to the women of Rizal's letter to the women of Malolos was actually a response to a request made by Marcelo H. Del Pilar on behalf of the women in Bulacan, in that particular town in Bulacan, who were also trying to do the same thing as the Association of Students in El Filibusterismo, trying to open up a school for Spanish instruction. I would say this is basically recognizing the role of women, and I am very much interested with that and the rights of women to assert who they are. It's time that they are recognized. I've shown earlier we have women for the first time and only time so far in the Philippines that we have We have one receiving Nobel Peace Prize. It happens to have been won by a woman. The first gold medal in Olympics uh, for women. First gold medal in the Olympics was won by a woman. We have had women leaders. So I think Rizal already saw and recognized the promise in women, and um, maybe our women audience can add to this. So may I throw it back to you, ladies. Uh, how do you see this invitation of Dr. Rizal challenging the women of Malolos, the women of the Philippines, to come up and raise strong sons and daughters, educated ones and courageous ones, and be part, not only followers, but be part of the leadership in governance?
If there are if there are no answers from the ladies, may I be allowed to answer
Please
that?
go ahead. Please go
Please go
ahead,
ahead,
Sir
Sir.
Lutz.
Okay, unless there are ladies who would like to respond to that. Now, as you know, the letter to the women of Malolos was well initiated, or it was, I think, Marcelo Del Pilar who asked Jose Rizal to write to the women of Malolos. Why? Why did Marcelo Del Pilar ask Jose Rizal? Well, Marcelo Del Pilar, of course, recognized the uh, brilliance of Rizal in letter writing. And Rizal immediately accepted that request because the women of Malolos were denied education because the Cora Parroco, the parish priest, was saying, no, you women, pambahay kayo lang. You do not have to study, you do not have to learn. It's for the men to do that. You stay at home. That was the tenor of the rationale why Marcelo Del Pilar asked Rizal to write that. And Rizal, of course, did not believe that the women, because perhaps he had sisters, more sisters than one brother. So he had to write that letter. And I remember one president who was trying to get reelected and whose opponent was a woman. And at one unguarded moment, he was quoted as saying, itong kalabang ko for president, pangkama lang yan. Hindi pwede siya pang presidente. Mukhang, well, that was wrong for him to say that. And I think that was one of the reasons why there was a deluge of sympathies and votes for Cory Aquino. It was wrong for us all, for any man, whether macho or not, to be saying that, because we should educate Filipinos, especially yung women, because kasama natin yan sa bahay. Kukulangin tayo kung wala sila. So I think that's the concept. I think Rizal was saying, why don't you be like my sisters? My sisters are educated and very literate. Siguro ganun ang one. Okay. Thank you. I hope I did not steal yung opportunity ng mga babaeng sumagot. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Sir Lutz. May we hear from the Kababaihang group on that issue? Dr. Rizal challenging the women to pursue education, and during his time, it was like to study Spanish. But of course, today it's not just language acquisition, language learning, but really capacity building. You know, to be in professions, to be in leadership, to be, maybe hear from you, mga kababaihan. Dr. Marican, Dr. Ganier.
We have with us Sir Mark Boado. Maybe do you have any comments on this, Sir Mark?
Sir Mark?
Hi, sir. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we do.
Yes.
Sorry, I cannot open my video. I'm still here in Mindanao.
Yeah. You look good with this video, with the photo, Doc. Please go ahead.
Yeah. We're talking about the women of Malolos, one of the best writings of Rizal aside from Nolin and Philly. And it really showed us the vision of Rizal of women empowerment. And that's what I'm saying, especially to the young women, my students, no? That their right, their power, their value should be highlighted, especially now. Kasi during the time of Rizal, the rights activities of the women are limited. But now with the advent of innovation and all the happenings and modernization here, Rizal showed to us the value of women, that they can do things in parallel with us men. That's why we in the Knights of Rizal, we also value women, especially on the activities of our counterpart organizations. Kababayang Rizalista, Las Damas de Rizal, and the Women Kabataang Pangarap de Rizal. So, in fact, the letter of Rizal to the young women of Malolos talks about the values of the Filipino women and the Filipinos in general. That we should be appreciative, and we should, observe as a Filipino.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sir Mark. Any other questions or comments about the lecture? Well, I think everybody is mesmerized by the lecture.
Correct.
Yeah,
That's correct.
to use Sir Lutz's words.
Forgive me, but I know it went a little long, but I tried to chop it down. I skipped certain parts already too. But when I was writing it, I got, anything that has to do with, and Sir Jun knows about this, anything that has to do with civil rights and human rights, I just get provoked, and I don't know. But let's remember that the novels of Dr. Rizal and many other writings hit so many different points and challenge so many different groups of people. The women, even the men, right? The leadership, the church, media, he family. It's like, and then he addressed many of us have read Noli Me Tangere. We'll recognize, we'll realize that almost like 1/3 of the book is actually dealing about the culture of the people. Yeah, he was an ethnologist, so to say, and he stressed on being proud of being who we are. There sometimes I kind of, I have a friend. He passed away already. He used to be professor and chair of ethnic studies at the University of Hawaii, Dr. Dean Alegado. And what he did was he resigned from his work as professor and chair of a department at University of Hawaii and decided to go back to the Philippines. And I interviewed him for a paper, and I asked him, "Oh, why are you doing that? I mean, why are you resigning? Why are you leaving Hawaii and going back to the Philippines?" And his response was, "Raymond, that's not the question. What's the question?" And he said, "When are you going back?" Yeah. And that haunts me. That kind of question haunts me. But for many of us who have moved to another place, it it is really a challenge to us. But this is what I have thought about this a lot. But something that I have realized is this, you know, and many of us have already realized that we can remove a Filipino from the Philippines, but then we can never take away the Philippines from the Filipino. Yeah. In Ilocano, mabalin tayo nga mabagot ni Pilipino, manipod iti Pilipina nga daga. Ngimhantay to nga maketel di Pilipinas, manipod sa dinuman te pakaipalapala nga daga. Right? I mean, the country and the people will always be in the hearts and minds of those, you know, even who have gone far. And that's why we have, in Filipinos, we have the concept of balikbayan. We have the concept of remittances. We have the, so yeah, and it all goes back on the emphasis of result to of the family. Sir Jun, back to you.
Okay. Thank you. So if there are no other questions or comments, then I would like to thank our distinguished lecturer.
May I say something?
Oh, okay, okay.
We still have time? We still have
okay,
time.
a few minutes, yeah.
Yeah. Dr. Raymond mentioned it correctly, that the prime duty of government is to serve the people.
Mm-hmm.
And this was, of course, in the writing of Rizal. And when that government is abusive or is unable to provide the necessary services, or in fact is not anymore responsive to its function of serving the people, then the people have the right to change that government. I was interviewed together with 4 or 5 other senatoriables the other night, and the question was about the West Philippine Sea. And I remember saying that we won this case at the United Nations Permanent Arbitral Tribunal.
Mm-hmm.
We should protect that. And the anchorman was saying, well, but how do we protect that? Well, I said it's in the national policy. I think let me be brutally frank about it, but I think we should change the president. He thinks he's the architect of the foreign policy, but it is a wrong policy to just hands off and say, well, ako'y inotel eh. Wala akong magagawa kasi kuha na sila, naka-occupy na sila. That is wrong. We have been saying that Rizal, if he should be relevant and should be material in our governance and in our daily activities, we should rely on what Rizal said, and we should speak our minds. And that is why, for example, the deprivation of human dignity and violations of human rights, these are Rizalian ideas. Of course, it's a universal idea, but Rizal espoused that. And he was saying that you Spaniards, you have no right to despise us. You have no right to show indignity to us simply because we have brown skins. And Rizal was against the abuse of power, just like we are, or we should be against abuse of power. Because those who are in power are simply, I will be repetitive about this, and they are simply public servants. They are our contractual employees for about 6 years or 4 years. And therefore, if they cannot do their job, they should be looking for another job elsewhere, not public service. So Rizal is very relevant. And in my speaking engagements and even in my some writings, I am always inspired by Rizal. And right now, I am inspired by Sir Raymond and Sir June, and the proper guidance of the Knights of Rizal will always be relevant. Thank you.
Thank you, Sir Lutz. And with that, I would like to thank our distinguished lecturer and our equally distinguished reactor, as well as the participants for this very interesting educational exercise. It is my hope that this lecture has given us a better understanding of the two major books of our national hero, the Noli Me Tangere and the El Filibusterismo, why they are considered as resistance literature, and why they are as relevant today as they were during the time of Dr. Jose Rizal. By the way, those who are interested in getting a certificate of attendance for this lecture, please email me at juncolme@yahoo.com. That's JUNCOLME@yahoo.com.
I am delighted to see at least younger faces than I think the age group I would belong to, because time will come na mapag-iiwanan namin yung itong mahal nating lupa, and you are going to be picking up the cudgels, and we look forward to your leadership and your energy. The country needs you. Raji, you can continue.
Thank you, Sir Raymond. Okay, one last picture, everyone. So smile one more time. Okay, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sir Raj. And thank you to
you,
all
sir.
Our faculty.
Thank you, Sir Raji.
Yeah, I just would like to extend faculty members of different universities who extended their invitations to their respective students. I see a lot of very young faces here, university college students here. Thank you for joining us. Please stand by for posting of future lectures that we have. On behalf of the Knights of Rizal Aloha chapter, we thank you, and I would like to give it back to our commander, who's like our president in the Knights of Rizal Aloha chapter, Dr. Serafin Colmenares.
Thanks, Sir Raymond. Well, this ends our 10th lecture in the Rizalian lecture series sponsored by the Knights of Rizal Aloha chapter. Tune in for the next Zoom lecture, which will be on December 11, 2021, the same time. Dr. Carmelito Nomer Abolencia, a professor of philosophy at the Eastern Visayas State University in the Philippines, will be our next lecturer, and he will talk on the topic, the theology of struggle in the Noli and Fili.
Okay. Good.
Until then, mahalo and aloha to all of you. Stay safe, everyone.
Maraming salamat.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Maraming salamat.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.